In the early months of 1942, the Pacific Ocean was a vast, blood-stained graveyard of Allied ambitions. The catastrophic surprise attack on Pearl Harbor had crippled the United States battle fleet, leaving a trail of twisted steel and burning oil. In the weeks that followed, the Imperial Japanese Navy swept across the Pacific like an unstoppable tide. Guam fell, Wake Island fell. Singapore, the reputedly impregnable fortress of the British Empire, collapsed. The Philippines were overwhelmed, and American and Filipino soldiers were forced into the brutal death marches of Bataan. To the global public watching the catastrophe unfold, Japan appeared omnipotent. Wielding a naval air fleet, the feared Kido Butai, that moved across the ocean with total impunity, yet deep beneath the tropical surface of Oahu, hidden away from the warm Pacific breeze and the sunlit military parades, a very different kind of war was being waged. In the subterranean darkness of Building 1 at Pearl Harbor sat a damp, windowless basement known officially as the Combat Intelligence Unit Pacific, and known to those who slaved inside it simply as Station HYPO. The air in the basement was suffocatingly thick, heavy with the stench of stale tobacco smoke, rotting paper, sweat, and the electric hum of primitive IBM tabulating machines. The room was crisscrossed by overhead pipes that dripped condensation onto wooden desks piled high with tens of thousands of coded messages. The men who inhabited this subterranean dungeon looked less like elite military operatives and more like exhausted castaways. They worked 20-hour shifts, fueled by cold coffee and relentless anxiety. Their eyes bloodshot from staring at endless grids of numbers. At the center of this secret universe was Commander Joseph Rochefort. Rochefort was an eccentric genius, a man who defied every convention of traditional naval officer corps. He routinely padded around the humid basement, wearing a faded pink corduroy bathrobe and carpet slippers over his uniform to ward off the chill of the ventilation drafts. He was a master of the Japanese language and culture, having spent years living in Japan during the 1920s, immersing himself in the subtle nuances of its syntax, idiom, and military mindset. Rochefort possessed a rare, intuitive mind capable of seeing order within absolute chaos. Surrounding Rochefort was a ragtag collection of brilliant misfits. There was Lieutenant Commander Thomas Dyer, a mathematical prodigy who could manipulate data with the speed of an early computer, and Edwin Layton, the sharp, analytical Pacific Fleet intelligence officer who had Rochefort's absolute trust. Perhaps most surprisingly, Rochefort had filled the ranks of Station HYPO with former Navy band musicians. He reasoned those musicians possessed an innate sensitivity to rhythm, tempo, and repeating motif skills that proved far more valuable in breaking complex enemy codes than traditional military tactical training. The adversary facing Station HYPO was JN-25, the principal operational code book of the Imperial Japanese Navy. JN-25 was a beast of staggering complexity. It consisted of roughly 45,000 individual 5-digit code groups representing words, phrases, and geographic locations. To make matters vastly more difficult, the Japanese did not transmit these code groups in their raw form. Instead, they encrypted them using a secondary table of random numbers, a process known as Every single message transmitted across the airwaves was a double-wrapped puzzle. To an untrained ear listening to the shortwave radio static, the intercepted signals were nothing more than meaningless numerical gibberish, day and night. Radio intercept stations scattered across the Pacific from Alaska to Samoa plucked these invisible Morse code signals out of the ether and routed them directly to HYPO. Rochefort and his team set to work on a monumental task of mathematical reconstruction. Without possessing the physical Japanese codebooks, they charted letter frequencies, cross-referenced timestamps with known ship movements, and used IBM punchcard machines to group recurring numerical combinations. It was agonizing, meticulous labor. Out of a message containing 100 code groups, HYPO might successfully decipher only 5 or 10 words. But those isolated words were precious fragments of truth. By late April 1942, Station HYPO's painstaking efforts began to yield extraordinary results. Rochefort and his team began picking up fragments of radio traffic, indicating that the Imperial Navy was planning a major offensive in the South Pacific aimed at capturing Port Moresby in New Guinea. Deciphering parts of JN-25, HYPO identified the target as MO and accurately predicted the timing and composition of the Japanese strike force. Armed with this intelligence, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, Admiral Chester Nimitz, dispatched American aircraft carriers to intercept the enemy. The resulting Battle of the Coral Sea in early May was a tactical draw, but a strategic victory for the first time. A Japanese naval advance had been checked, yet Rochefort knew that Coral Sea was merely a curtain raiser. As May wore on, the volume of radio traffic across the Pacific surged to unprecedented levels. Japanese naval communication centers were broadcasting thousands of messages a day. Sitting in his basement, wrapped in his pink bathrobe, Rochefort sensed a massive, catastrophic storm gathering on the horizon. Imperial Japanese Navy Commander-in-Chief, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, was preparing a vast operation designed to draw the remaining American aircraft carriers into a decisive battle and annihilate them once and for all. As HYPO's cryptanalysts picked apart the flood of encrypted signals, a single recurring designator kept appearing in the intercepted JN-25 messages. It was clear that AF was the primary objective of Yamamoto's massive armada. The entire fate of the Pacific War hinged on 2 letters. But what, precisely, was AF? The tension inside the basement of Station HYPO reached a breaking point as May 1942 drew toward a close. Joseph Rochefort and Edwin Layton were convinced that AF designated Midway Atoll, tiny, strategic coral outcrop located roughly 1,200 miles northwest of Hawaii. If Japan captured Midway, they could establish an unsinkable airbase that would directly threaten Pearl Harbor and force the United States to fight from its own west coast. However, senior intelligence officials in Washington, D.C., operating at naval headquarters under OP-2, vehemently disagreed with the Hawaiian basement team. Washington analysts argued that AF represented the Aleutian Islands off Alaska, or perhaps even Oahu itself, or the west coast of America. They viewed Rochefort's team as arrogant subordinates, relying on guesswork rather than sound doctrine. Admiral Richmond K. Turner and other Washington brass urged Admiral Nimitz not to commit his precious remaining aircraft carriers based on the theories of a man wearing a bathrobe in a basement. Rochefort knew he needed indisputable proof to break the bureaucratic deadlock. He conferred with his brilliant staff officer, Lieutenant Jasper Holmes, and together they devised a masterstroke of psychological deception. Midway Island communicated with Pearl Harbor via a secure undersea telegraph cable. Rochefort instructed the commander of the military garrison on Midway to send an plain language radio message over the airwaves stating that the island's freshwater distillation plant had suffered a catastrophic breakdown and that the garrison was critically low on drinking water. The message was sent out into the Pacific air precisely as planned. Station HYPO waited in breathless silence. Less than 48 hours later, an intercept station in Hawaii picked up an encrypted JN-25 transmission sent by a Japanese intelligence unit. Rochefort's team frantically decrypted the message. It read, "AF is short on fresh water." The trap had worked with absolute perfection. The debate was instantly over. Washington was silenced, and Admiral Nimitz had the definitive proof he needed. AF was Midway. Station HYPO did not merely identify the target. They broke down Yamamoto's operational plan down to the finest operational details. They provided Nimitz with the exact date of the planned attack, June 4th, the precise vector of approach, the exact number of enemy aircraft carriers involved, and the names of the commanding admirals. It was an unprecedented intelligence triumph. Armed with this divine foresight, Nimitz made the ultimate strategic gamble of the war. He ordered his 3 available aircraft carriers, USS Enterprise, USS Hornet, and the hastily patched-up USS Yorktown, which had been repaired in a record 72 hours after sustaining heavy damage at Coral Sea, set sail for a point in the vast ocean northeast of Midway, designated simply as Point Luck. On the morning of June 4, 1942, Vice Admiral Kichi Nagumo's first air fleet, the formidable Kido Butai, consisting of the 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga Soryu, and Huron, launched a massive airstrike against Midway Island. Nagumo sailed forward in absolute confidence, entirely convinced that the American fleet was nursing its wounds in Pearl Harbor, totally unaware that 3 U.S. aircraft carriers were waiting silently in ambush just beyond the horizon. When Japanese reconnaissance aircraft finally spotted the American fleet, panic and confusion erupted on the flight decks of the Kido Butai. Nagumo's decks were cluttered with armed high-explosive bombs, aerial torpedoes, and fully fueled aircraft. As his crews frantically attempted to switch weapons from land attack munitions to ship attack torpedoes, the initial waves of American land-based bombers and carrier torpedo squadrons attacked first. Flying low and slow, the American Devastator torpedo bombers were utterly decimated by swarms of Japanese Zero fighters and heavy anti-aircraft fire. Nearly every American torpedo plane was shot down without landing a single strike on the enemy ships. But their sacrifice was not in vain. The low-level attacks drew the Japanese Zero fighter cover down to sea level, leaving the skies high above the Japanese fleet completely unguarded. At 10:22 a.m., at an altitude of 14,000 feet, American SBD Dauntless dive bombers, commanded by Wade McCluskey and Max Leslie, emerged from the clouds. Below them lay the crown jewels of the Imperial Navy, their flight decks packed with gasoline hoses, unattached bombs, and strike aircraft preparing to launch within 5 agonizing, catastrophic minutes. American dive bombers transformed 3 of Japan's premier aircraft carriers, Kaga and Soryuin, to roaring, exploding cauldrons of infernal fire. Secondary explosions ripped through the hulls as bombs detonated parked aircraft and open munitions piles. Later that afternoon, the 4th carrier, Hirin, managed to launch a counterstrike that mortally wounded the USS Yorktown. But American dive bombers soon found Hirin and reduced it to a burning wreck as well. The Battle of Midway was a decisive, catastrophic defeat for the Imperial Japanese Navy. In a single day, Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, hundreds of elite naval aviators, and the strategic initiative in the Pacific, a loss from which its war effort would never recover. The tide of World War II in the Pacific had turned irrevocably, while fighter pilots and dive bomber crews executed the tactical strike with legendary bravery. The victory at Midway was fundamentally conceived, calculated, and brought to fruition in the dark, damp basement of Pearl Harbor. Without the intellectual brilliance, obsessive dedication, and daring deception engineered by Joseph Rochefort and the cryptanalysts of Station HYPO, the American fleet would have sailed blindly into an ambush rather than springing one of its own in the tragic aftermath of the victory. Political infighting and bitter jealousy within the naval bureaucracy in Washington denied Joseph Rochefort the Distinguished Service Medal he so richly deserved during his lifetime. He was reassigned to command a floating dry dock, yet history ultimate redeemed him. Station HYPO stands as one of the greatest intelligence triumphs in military history, testament to how a small group of exhausted, brilliant men in carpet slippers and pink bathrobes changed the fate of the modern world.